Hello, it's Greg Grizzled and Gaijin. We're back. We hope you're having a happy day wherever you're listening to this audio content from. As always, we'd like to thank you for your continued support of Greg Grizzled and Gaijin social media and writing efforts. Thank you, thank you, thank you. This is episode 041 of the Greg Grizzled and Gaijin, definitely not a podcast show, a light and fluffy look at social media, Japan, Japanese food, expat life, and life in general. As always, your retweets of this and all the wonderful, wonderful, wonderful content that we actively tweet and retweet out on Craig Hoffman 11 on Twitter is appreciated. Thank you in advance for helping us get the good word out about Greg Grizzled and Gaijin. Welcome back, another good show today. Have a few days off this spring vacation in 2019 from the salt mine, so I'm able to do even more content than normal, which is something I'm very, very passionate about. I love talking about Japan and social media and life in general. And again, I don't do these audio shows for ratings or fame and fortune. I do think I have insight after 14 years this week in Japan, and congratulations and a pat on the back to me. And we go onwards and upwards from there in life, as one does. But I think I have something to offer to people, whether they are thinking about coming here, whether they've been here a short time, or like me, whether they're in it for the long haul. Doesn't mean I have every answer for people, but I do think I have something for people to at least consider and hopefully add something positive to their lives. That being said, today's a topic I don't generally talk about on Twitter or the blog or in any of these audio shows. Talking about studying Japanese, a lot of people do a lot of great content, so I'm not going to tell you what you should be doing as far as studying Japanese, and I'm not going to tell you like one of those 8 mistakes that you're making for studying Japanese. You can go on the internet or YouTube and find much higher quality content about that. I've seen and read and watched and listened to a lot of folks talk about such a thing. I'm going to tell you what worked and didn't work for me, and if that helps you, great, and if it doesn't, fine. I say that as a person who's gotten back into a bit more hardcore studying again. I had taken a break of a couple years. Of course, I live in Japan, and my company, I have to use Japanese every day, but you'd be surprised how little Japanese it actually takes to live in Japan. So there's that. So I came to Japan, as I said, 14 years ago this week. I had 0 Japanese, and early on, I got a volunteer teacher from the local Japanese Teacher Community Association. I studied every Monday by myself for about a year with a very, very intelligent and well-spoken Japanese woman. She was great, a former English teacher by chance, and our lessons were good. We used a book called Mina no Nihongo. I also made effort to get out, and I tried to use Japanese outside of my job. I was an assistant language teacher, so I didn't use Japanese at school. My school had several high-level Japanese English teachers who preferred that I use English only at school, as did the vice principal, and I obliged. But in the community, on my off time, I tried to use English as much, or rather Japanese, I wish I could use English. Yeah, use Japanese as much as I could, and I did study daily. I studied every morning, and I studied most every afternoon in addition to those lessons. I'm terrible at Japanese in the beginning. I mean, god awful, and that's selling my ability, or rather overselling my ability by a lot. I just didn't get it. I'm a very bright dude. I'd even studied Spanish in high school and college and even won some awards. So I had this idea I would come to Japan, I would study hard, I would take some lessons, and I'd become really fluent in Japanese. I don't know about you, and I have seen it happen, but that did not happen for me. My Japanese did not come along. I was here about a year, and I could get basic greetings, and my listening was okay in most situations, school related and basic community interactions, as well as doing basic things like going to the store. I could get my milk and my eggs or whatever, and I could probably get into karaoke by myself by the end of the first year. And I ordered a pizza on the phone in Japanese at the very end of my first year, and that was kind of my quote Japanese end quote test of my ability. So the pizza came and it was hot and fresh, so I don't know if I was perfect in Japanese during that short little phone conversation, but it was my very first time on the phone, and I was most pleased. And I think that's the first thing. You have to challenge yourself to do and be more in a second language like Japanese. And so it gets really easy. You know, I had other foreigners living in my area. It was easy to say, hey, can you help me? Hey, can you help me? And they were all very kind, and they helped me because their Japanese was much, 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 much better than mine at that time. They had been here several years, and some of them had studied Japanese as a major in college. So they were really good. It's also easy to depend on a community member who speaks English. And in my small community, there was a large and active community of Japanese people who volunteered their time to a sister cities relationship, and many of them spoke a high level of English. All the emails I got when I was doing that job were in English. I never had to read any Japanese. All of the members who needed something from me did their best in English. I got very little chance to read and interact in Japanese. And I think that's the second part. You have to make opportunities for yourself to use and engage Japanese. I felt like, you know, I'm studying every day. I got my kanji flashcards. I made them by hand. I got my vocabulary flip cards. They sell these little flip cards at Daiso. That's a 100 yen or 100 yen store. I had all those cards. I had even some dialect books. I spent time studying Kyoto Ben when I first came here. I had an Osaka Ben print that I was using, a Kansai Ben, and even inside Kansai Ben, there's a Banshu Ben in my local area. I was pretty quick. I went out every day to restaurants and bars to practice ordering things, and I talked to complete strangers about the weather, the sports, the news, anything I could. It doesn't mean I was perfect. And I got pretty good at daily conversation by the end of the second, going into my third year. And I felt like I was making some Japanese progress, I guess. And I moved on to kind of an intermediate kind of level, perhaps. And I kind of plateaued. And I remember getting really frustrated about not really improving. And I kind of lost enthusiasm. And I think that's another good point. If you're losing enthusiasm, don't be afraid to change up what you're doing. Instead of giving up, I found more Japanese teachers. I started taking private lessons Monday nights, Wednesday nights, and I took 2 extra lessons on Saturday. So that's like 4 hours of Japanese private instruction a week. One of them on Saturday was eventually a group class, but that's a lot of one-to-one time, and I'm studying every day, but I'm just not getting better. And I can't tell you enough how poor my Japanese acquisition ability was. Have no reason for it. Again, it's not a smarts thing. You start to feel really dumb. You're like, why can't I remember? Why can't I answer that question? Why don't I get any better despite my big effort? If you see me on social media, my blog, I'm that kind of person in real life. I was making a sincere amount of effort to study Japanese. And again, I was buying more books. I'd go to the local Junkado that were in my area, and I'd go through all of the bookstore stuff to see what they had as far as new Japanese stuff. I bought a big box of kanji cards. I still have it. There's like 700 cards in that box, and I was daily, I divided and conquered like they tell you to do, little by little, the spaced repetition stuff. And going into my 4th year, I even got a Japanese girlfriend who later became my wife, and I didn't get much better. I'm still intermediate at that point. And wow, you know, it's embarrassing. I'm starting to meet her family. We got pretty serious. And they're like, you know, where are you from? And I'm like, well, you know, I'm America, karikimashita. You know, I'm from America. And they're like, oh, shigoto. I'm like, eigo no sensei. You know, and that's about as deep as I was going with my future mother-in-law. Let me tell you, when the pressure's on and you're trying to make a good impression with family and you don't have the Japanese, you really almost are in tears of that. You can be sure. So if you're thinking about, you know, marrying a Japanese girl or man here and your Japanese is terrible, you might want to rethink that one. Trust me on that. I got to the end of my 4th year. I got fortunate. I'm still taking those private lessons a lot. I'm still studying a lot. I'm talking more and more to my wife. I'm getting better at kanji. I'm reading more. I bought more Noryoku Shiken, that's the JLPT, the Japanese language proficiency test books. I'm reading every day, trying to improve, and I'm still intermediate, really low intermediate, but I'm feeling good because I can get around in daily situations, right? I get to the end of my 5th year and my job ends. The contract limit came and I was replaced. I didn't find a new full-time gig, so I signed up for a YMCA advanced course for 3 months. It was expensive at the time. I spent like $3,000 plus books to enter. And I went and I spent train money to go to Himeji every day. That was Monday to Friday. And I was in a class with 8 other Chinese students and one very nice girl from South Korea. They had been in the 2-year course that the YMCA offered, and they were all really great speakers. But everybody thought, hey, Craig must be great at Japanese because he's lived in Japan for 5 years. And while I had lived in Japan for 5 years, I had been teaching English for 5 years. And those guys in university, as well as in that YMCA course, had been studying hardcore Japanese. And of course, they were much better at reading kanji. They were much faster at answering questions. They were much faster at writing. My writing was terrible. It's still not my forte, which is sad. But, you know, I was getting my butt kicked every day. And when you missed the daily quizzes questions, you go home at night and you had to rewrite the assignments. And you had to rewrite like 5 times every question that you missed. It was taking me literally hours, 5 days a week and weekends too, to finish my review assignments. And the very next day I get more work because Monday I get a quiz. I had no homework. Tuesday I get a quiz. I get that quiz back. I get like 35% right. So I've got like 75% of the work to review. I mean, I'm getting killed in class. And I remember that first week, I went to the director. I said, I don't know if this course is for me. I mean, I had been an excellent student my whole life. It was the first time in my life that I got my lunch handed to me. And it was a humbling experience. I cannot stress that enough. What it's like to be dead. You spend your whole life at the upper echelon of academia and you sit in a class and no matter how hard you try, you get kicked. But I stuck with the course. And I did the work and the homework. And by the end of the 3 months, yeah, my reading got a lot better and I was improved. And I had signed up for the JLPT. Again, that's the Japanese Language Proficiency Test. Signed up for the 2nd level. And I went and the teacher said, you'll be all right, I think. Got crushed. I got the results several weeks later, as you did. And you do it when you take that test. Absolutely destroyed. And surprisingly, my listening was not nearly as good as I thought it would be. And you realize that what you think you know and what you really know in a foreign language like Japanese can be very, very different. I figured at least my listening was good after 5 years of living in Japan. I mean, how many countless conversations had I heard over the years? The reality was that I was not nearly as accurate in comprehension. What I was really good in reading people, and I had a lot of experience living in Japan, so I could kind of, quote, figure out what people were talking about and what people were doing. There was no more evidence that I needed of this anytime I went on the phone. My supervisor would call me to do things, and I would just be like, I would listen, and I'd be, yeah. Okay, wakarimashita, I understand. And then he would ask for my wife, and my wife would take it, and he would tell my wife he didn't understand anything, did he? Because he was asking me questions, and I was saying yes to questions that weren't yes and no. And so don't get a lot of ego that you think you're really, really super high level, and you don't have any issue, and you don't need to really review, and take it slow, little by little. And there was some ego in that, I think, after 5 years. But I took a step back, and I spent another year with a private tutor. I had lessons Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. 4 days a week, 4 hours. And I was working around that as it was. And he was like, for the first time, a teacher said, Craig, your Japanese is terrible. And I said, yeah, it is, isn't it? And he said, what have you been doing? For 5 years. I said, living in Japan, working, married to a Japanese woman. I said, oh. But clearly, you ain't been learning Japanese. He was a funny guy. Still alive, I hope. I haven't talked to him in a while. And it hit me that I had not really been learning Japanese. I had been studying Japanese. That part was true. But I hadn't been learning Japanese. And we went step by step back to the beginning. I went back to those Mina no Nihongo books. And I was reviewing and making my sentences and using my examples every lesson. We'd read the example and he'd say, Craig, can you make an example? And I said, okay, sure. And he said, can you make 10 more? And I said, well, maybe no. And when I started to work on my ability to make multiple examples of every grammar point using whatever word we were talking about in a multitude of ways, my Japanese improved. Not as fast as I would have liked, but I got much, much better. And of course, by this time, my cell phone and apps were getting a little better, and I improved and really focused on improving my kanji and my vocabulary and my grammar. And I still felt like I'm intermediate. And my teacher after that year said, wow, you've improved a lot, but you're still terrible. So I had been in Japan like 6 years. And I got a job, so, I got to keep the lights on, and I got to work. And my study time went down to 30 minutes to an hour. I mean, that's the time that I could spare. And to be honest, life gets busy, and my home life got busy, and Japanese study kind of got pushed off. Of course, I'm still, again, living in Japan. I work at a company where Japanese is very, very necessary. And I did get better, and I'm studying when I can. And, little by little, my kanji is improving. But then I got to about year 10 here. And now, I own a condo, I have a car. And June of that year, I got an ear infection and I couldn't hear both left and right. I mean, I'm like almost completely deaf. And now I'm really screwed, right? And I go to the doctor and they're sticking this big needle in my ear. And he says, are you okay? In Japanese. And I'm like, huh? And he's like, he turns to my wife and he says, does he understand any Japanese? And I realized that I could understand the Japanese, but I couldn't hear anything, and the needle was in my ear. And I bring up that story because it's a great metaphor for how I eventually improved my Japanese. I took the needle out of my ear, and I opened my ears, and I did a lot more listening. The internet was full. YouTube was getting bigger. There were many, many examples on YouTube in Japanese with English subtitles and some of them not, where I had a chance to really listen to short excerpts again and again and again. And I really went through a lot of my CDs. Instead of being a passive listener of those relatively easy CDs, I started to shadow them and mimic them and repeat them, building what seemed so simple. Oh, Craig Sensei, genki desu ka? Genki desu yo. Onaka suita. Are you hungry? Hai, watashi wa onaka suita desu. And you realize that when you build a solid core of basic speaking and you're improving your listening more and more by listening to stuff that you probably can't say, but at least you recognize, your speaking and listening combined improve your understanding of Japanese. And my listening in Japanese has improved. And I bought an Asahi Shimbun Tensei Jingo book, which are these little God and man essays these days. And this is after, again, a lot of many hours of kanji and vocabulary and grammar study. But I read those one every day and go back and review. They come in these books that are like 3-month binded issues of that series. And it's my reading. My reading is probably still my weakest element of my Japanese. And so that's what I spend 80% of my time studying. I don't spend a lot of time now reviewing stuff that I know I'm probably didn't forget or can do to a reasonable level above 80%. And my Japanese continues to improve. I talked about my Japanese teacher saying my Japanese was terrible. My wife loves me, and I love my wife completely, but she will be the first person to throw me under a bus with my Japanese. But in the last year or so, she said, "You're not so terrible." And that's about as nice as she's going to get in that subject. And I realized this. I had to go to the hospital this week for a checkup, and I went in and talked to the doctor alone. And of course, there's a lot of medical Japanese, and there was a lot going on in a lot of forms. But I realized that I didn't need any help from her. She came in later and she sat behind me. I was still a little nervous. I wanted someone to check to make sure I wasn't going to say something that was going to get me killed or miss something that would save my life. And I'm not in dire straits, but it was a serious enough issue I wanted to check. And she was surprised that I didn't need her help. And that's 14 years, right? So I'm as terrible as I could be. I've taken the Japanese proficiency test 6 times at the N2 level, and I've failed 6 times. The last time was several years ago, probably 3, almost 4 years now. I would probably pass now, and probably actually, I'm pretty sure I would pass EQ. But I can tell you, if you're struggling with Japanese, you're not any worse than I was, or even that I might still be. So there is hope for you. But you have to keep at it, keep grinding away, and making sure that you're maximizing the time that you do have to study. Let's be honest. I'm a real person with a real job with limited time. I have to make the most of it. So don't waste time speaking English when you're studying Japanese. Don't waste time on the internet listening to YouTube in English. Don't waste time reading Yahoo News in English if you can and are able to grind your way through those things in Japanese. It makes a big, big difference when you use every opportunity rather than kind of cherry picking and say, oh, I'm studying Japanese, and then sliding right back into most of your day in English. You're just going to be stuck at an intermediate level forever and ever and ever. And again, if you have dreams about coming to Japan, if you have dreams about living here a long time, and God forbid you had dreams about marrying a Japanese national and spending your last hours here until you croak, it behooves you to get on the Japanese with reckless abandon and a passion that burns deep, deep, deep within your heart. Of that, you can be sure. So the next time you're feeling down about your Japanese, you feel you can't do it, believe in yourself, but more to the point, be focused and put a full effort into your studies. Best of luck. That's it, and have a great, great day.